Hello, everyone. Welcome to Daily Storyteller, and today I'm here to help you sleep. So before we begin, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching. Lay back comfortably, relax, and let's begin. Part 1. The year was 2018, late October. The world had settled into the hum of modern life, but deep in the countryside of Vermont, there was a place where time stood still. Ravenwood Cabin sat alone, shrouded by dense pines and the whispers of the wind. Its weathered walls bore the weight of countless seasons, its windows clouded with time and secrets. James Walker, a 32-year-old freelance writer, had rented the cabin for a week. He needed solitude to finish his upcoming book, a thriller about isolation. He had no idea how prophetic that choice would be. James had always loved the quiet. The city, with its constant buzz, suffocated him. So, when his editor suggested a getaway to focus, he jumped at the chance. Ravenwood Cabin seemed perfect. No Wi-Fi, no phone signal, just a landline in case of emergencies. The drive there was long and winding. As he pulled up, the cabin loomed ahead, half hidden in the mist. It looked older than in the photos, but it had character. Stepping inside, James noted the rustic charm, the creaking wood floors, the stone fireplace, and the faint scent of pine and dust. He unpacked quickly, set up his laptop, and began writing. But as the day wore on, the stillness of the place started to feel less peaceful and more heavy. That first night, the cabin was silent, save for the occasional crack of the wood as it adjusted to the cold. James sat by the fire, sipping coffee, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Around 11 p.m., a soft noise broke his concentration, a faint tap, tap, tap. He froze, listening. The sound seemed to come from the window behind him. Slowly he turned, but there was nothing outside, just darkness and the reflection of his own face. "Must be the wind," he muttered, shaking it off. He returned to his writing, but the unease lingered. Every so often he felt as if someone or something was watching him. The next morning, James dismissed the feeling as nerves. He spent the day hiking, gathering his thoughts. The woods were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears. He spotted an old shed about 100 yards from the cabin, its roof caved in. Curiosity tugged at him, but he decided to stay focused on his work. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the cabin felt colder. James lit the fireplace and sat down to write again. At around midnight, he heard it. The tap, tap, tap was back, louder this time. This time, he grabbed a flashlight and opened the front door. Cold air rushed in, but the porch was empty. No footprints in the dirt, no animals scurrying away. James shut the door, locked it, and tried to convince himself it was just his imagination. The third night was worse. The tapping returned, accompanied by faint creaks and groans from the cabin itself. James decided to investigate the attic, where he suspected the noises were coming from. Climbing the narrow stairs, he found himself in a small dusty space. Boxes and old furniture were scattered about. A single grimy window let in a sliver of moonlight. He was about to leave when something caught his eye. A leather-bound book lying on a trunk. It looked ancient, its cover cracked and faded. James opened it, revealing pages filled with handwritten notes. The ink had bled over time, but he could make out a few phrases. "She watches." "Don't let her in." "The last guest." A chill ran down his spine. Who wrote this, and who was she? Suddenly a loud bang echoed through the cabin. James dropped the book and rushed downstairs, heart pounding. The front door was wide open, swinging in the wind. He slammed it shut and locked it, checking every window. Nothing seemed out of place, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. James didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire, gripping the poker as a weapon. Around 3 a.m., the power flickered, then went out completely. The cabin was plunged into darkness. The tapping returned, now on every window. He couldn't see outside, but he felt the presence. Something or someone was circling the cabin. "Who's there?" James shouted, his voice trembling. The only response was silence. Then the landline phone rang. He hesitated before picking it up. A woman's voice, soft and cold, whispered, "You shouldn't have come." James dropped the phone, his breath shallow. He grabbed his car keys and bolted for the door. Outside, the forest seemed alive, shadows shifting unnaturally. He reached his car, but it wouldn't start. The engine sputtered and died, as if the cabin itself refused to let him go. A figure appeared at the edge of the trees. A woman, pale and gaunt, her eyes glowing faintly. She pointed at him, and the car locks clicked shut. James screamed, pounding on the windows. The woman began to move closer, her movements jerky like a marionette. Desperate, James dashed back into the cabin, slamming the door behind him, but she was already inside. The next thing James remembered, it was morning. He woke up in the middle of the living room, the fireplace cold and the cabin eerily still. His laptop was open, the screen displaying a single sentence: "You are the last guest." Terrified, James packed his things and left without looking back. He never spoke about what happened, but the memory haunted him. Months later, the owner of the cabin found James's manuscript left behind on a dusty shelf. It detailed everything he experienced, but the final pages were blank, save for one word scrawled in red ink: "Run." Part 2. It was 2015, a crisp autumn in Eastern Europe. The Targoveste forest, a dense, sprawling wilderness, lay untouched for centuries. Locals avoided it, claiming it was cursed, but Liam O'Connor saw it as an opportunity. A 35-year-old botanist from Ireland, Liam was obsessed with uncovering secrets of rare plant species. When rumors surfaced about glowing flora deep in Targoviste, he couldn't resist. He packed his tools, maps, and a week's worth of supplies, determined to document what others feared. The forest greeted him with towering oaks, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. A carpet of moss muffled his footsteps, and the faint smell of earth and decay hung in the air. It was quiet, too quiet. "This is perfect," Liam murmured, setting up his tent near a stream. He didn't believe in curses. Myths were nothing but tales to keep explorers like him away. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the silence deepened. The wind didn't stir the leaves. Even the stream seemed to flow quieter. Liam shook off the unease and focused on his work. The first night was uneventful, or so Liam thought. He woke up to find his equipment scattered around the campsite. His journal, which he always kept zipped in his bag, lay open near the fire pit. "Must have been the wind," he muttered, though the air had been still all night. By afternoon, Liam ventured deeper into the forest. His GPS barely worked under the dense canopy, but he marked his path with orange ribbons tied to tree branches. He collected samples of peculiar fungi, noting their iridescent sheen. As he crouched near a particularly large specimen, a faint rustling behind him made him freeze. Slowly he turned. Nothing. "Probably a deer," he whispered, but his pulse quickened. He was no stranger to being alone in the wilderness, but this felt different. Returning to camp, he noticed something odd. One of the orange ribbons he'd tied earlier was now on a different tree, further away from its original spot. He frowned, shaking his head. "I must have been tired." That night, the unease grew. As Liam lay in his tent, the rustling returned. It circled his campsite, accompanied by faint whispers, too faint to decipher. Clutching his flashlight, he unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The forest was dark, the beam of his flashlight barely piercing the shadows. "Hello?" he called, his voice shaky. The whispers stopped. By the third day, Liam's focus shifted from plants to the unsettling atmosphere around him. He found claw marks on a nearby tree, not from any animal he recognized. The marks were deep, deliberate, as if something wanted him to notice. Later, while exploring a ridge, he stumbled upon something extraordinary. A massive oak tree with gnarled roots stretching like veins across the forest floor. On its trunk were carvings, human faces etched in painstaking detail. Their hollow eyes seemed to follow him. Liam reached out, tracing a face with his fingers. The wood felt warm, pulsing faintly, as if alive. He yanked his hand back, his heart pounding. As he turned to leave, he heard it, a low guttural sound like a growl mixed with a deep sigh. It came from the direction of the carved tree. He ran, branches clawing at his jacket, roots threatening to trip him. When he finally reached his camp, it was in disarray. His tent was torn, his samples scattered. In the dirt near the fire pit was a single word, scrawled in the same iridescent hue as the fungi: "Leave." Liam decided to pack up and leave the next morning, but the forest had other plans. His map and GPS were gone, replaced by another message scratched into the ground. "Stay." He yelled into the trees. "Who's doing this?" His voice echoed back, but no answer came. As dusk fell, Liam heard it again, the whispers, closer this time. Shadows moved unnaturally between the trees, their shapes too fluid to be human. Desperate, he grabbed his flashlight and ran toward the ridge, hoping the higher ground would help him find his way out. But when he reached the top, the sight before him stopped him cold. The carved oak tree was there, but now the faces had changed. One of them resembled him, eyes wide in terror, mouth open in a silent scream. A sudden movement behind him made him spin around. A figure stood in the shadows, its form barely distinguishable. It seemed to blend with the trees, its limbs stretching and twisting like branches. Its face was blank, save for two glowing eyes. Liam stumbled backward, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "What do you want?" The figure pointed at him, then at the carved tree. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they were deafening. Liam covered his ears, falling to his knees, then silence. When he looked up, the figure was gone, but he wasn't alone. The faces on the tree were moving, their hollow eyes dripping black sap. When Liam woke, he was lying at the edge of the forest, his belongings scattered around him. His watch was cracked, and the date read 3 days later than he remembered. Disoriented, he stumbled into the nearest village. The locals stared at him, their expressions a mix of fear and pity. An old woman approached, her voice trembling. "You went into the Targo Vista, didn't you?" Liam nodded, his throat too dry to speak. "You're lucky to be alive," she said. "Most don't come back." He wanted to tell her everything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he opened his notebook to show her the samples he'd collected, the notes he'd taken, but the pages were blank. That night, as he lay in his hotel room, Liam dreamed of the forest. The carved tree loomed before him, its faces twisting and writhing. His own face stared back, whispering a single word: "Stay." Part 3. In late 2018, Stonebridge Storage, a sprawling warehouse on the outskirts of Denver, became the epicenter of a chilling mystery. By day, it bustled with workers moving crates, logging inventory, and fulfilling orders. But by night, its cold concrete halls were eerily silent, except for the hum of security cameras and the occasional echo of footsteps. Then, workers started vanishing. Ryan Patel, a 24-year-old inventory clerk, was the first. He was last seen walking into the farthest storage aisle at 8:47 p.m., a faint whistle audible on the footage. But Ryan never clocked out. His coffee mug sat abandoned in the break room, his notebook filled with sketches of landscapes he'd never finish. Security footage revealed an unsettling truth. Ryan walked into the shadows at the back of the warehouse and never came out. Amanda Hughes, the facility manager, was a decisive and efficient leader. At 38, she spent most of her career keeping warehouses like Stonebridge running smoothly. But even she couldn't shake the unease that crept in after Ryan's disappearance. Eddie Kramer, the night shift security guard, was an old-school professional in his mid-50s. His quiet demeanor masked a sharp mind and years of experience, but the events at Stonebridge rattled even him. Among the workers were Mia, a 19-year-old part-time employee saving for college, and Charlie, a forklift operator known for his laugh and penchant for telling ghost stories. Though they joked about Ryan's disappearance, the fear was palpable. A week later, Mia vanished. It was a quiet Tuesday night, and she had stayed late to organize a shipment. When Amanda arrived the next morning, Mia's handheld scanner blinked on the ground, its last entry incomplete. The security footage showed Mia walking down aisle 4. Suddenly she stopped, turned her head sharply, and muttered something inaudible. Then static filled the screen. When the image cleared, she was gone. Eddie replayed the footage a dozen times, convinced he saw a flicker, a shadowy shape at the edge of the frame. "It's not a glitch," he insisted. Amanda wasn't so sure. The atmosphere at Stonebridge grew tense. Charlie claimed to hear whispers when he worked late shifts, faint and fleeting like wind through a crack. One night while stacking crates, he saw something move in the shadows. "You're imagining things," Amanda told him, but her tone betrayed doubt. Eddie, meanwhile, became obsessed with the footage. "There's something here," he said one night, pointing to a blurred figure in the background of Mia's last video. "It's watching us." The turning point came on a stormy Friday night. Eddie was in the control room, sipping coffee and monitoring the cameras. Around midnight, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. He switched the feed to aisle 7 and froze. There it was, a figure, dark and blurred, standing at the end of the aisle. Its movements were jerky, its edges indistinct, as though it didn't fully belong to this world. Eddie grabbed his flashlight and radioed Amanda, who begged him to stay put. He didn't listen. The control room camera caught Eddie walking down aisle 7, flashlight beam bouncing ahead of him. Then the feed distorted, lines of static streaking the screen. The last frame showed Eddie turning, his face frozen in shock, before the screen cut to black. After Eddie's disappearance, a Stonebridge storage was shut down. Corporate claimed financial troubles, but the staff knew better. Amanda quit her job and moved away, haunted by the events. The remaining employees refused to speak about what they'd seen or heard. Urban explorers who dared venture into the abandoned warehouse reported strange occurrences. Footsteps echoed where no one walked. Equipment beeped without power. And in aisle 7, the air was colder than anywhere else, even in the dead of summer. To this day, no one knows what happened to Ryan, Mia, or Eddie. Some say the building was cursed. Others believe something darker lurks in the shadows of Stonebridge storage. Whatever the truth, One thing is certain, if you hear footsteps in the dark, don't look back. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more haunting tales. Check out our other videos for stories of the unexplained and the supernatural. Let us know in the comments what you think happened to the workers and what story you'd like to hear next. See you in the next video. See you.